Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. Dhul Qarnayn is mentioned in the Quran. Who is he? Was he a prophet? Was he Alexander the Great? Was he a legend? We're going to be exploring that now as part of our Misunderstood Quranic Verses series. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
The verse we're looking at, Dr. Shabir, is from chapter 18, verse 83, and it goes like this. And they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I will relate to you something of his narrative. So not much is said about him here.
Yes.
Who is he?
Dhul Qarnayn has puzzled Quranic commentators for generations. We know that Alexander the Great was referred to as Dhul Qarnayn in some stories about him. Why? Nobody knows for sure. It may be because he wore a helmet like the Celts, who had, two horns on their helmets. But the Quranic commentators were not sure why he's called Dhul Qarnayn. But some of the description that is in this story in the Quran seems to be similar to what is mentioned in stories about Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great, we know from history, was a Macedonian conqueror in about the 4th century of before the Common Era, and he conquered a large expanse of land. So he is referred to as Alexander the Great for that reason. Now, he was not known in history to be a pious individual, but the Christian stories about him prior to Islam do paint him as a pious individual who did this all for the sake of Christ and is awaiting the return of the Messiah or the coming of the Messiah and so on. Of course, he lived before Christ, but the Christian stories, patterned the actions in this way with this kind of hope about Christ and so on. So when Muslims try to match the story of Dhul Qarnayn with the Quranic narrative, they find that the Quranic narrative is about a pious individual. He seems to be referring to God a lot. He says in the end, "Hadha min fadli Rabbi," this is from the grace of my Lord, and so on. So he seems to be a devout individual. But what is known about Alexander the Great in history is not of this sort. It seems to be a mismatch, unless we go with the pre-Quranic stories. But the Muslim commentators did not want to make a connection between the Quranic story and the pre-Quranic stories about Dhul Qarnayn. They wanted to capture the history and show that the Quran is actually giving us a true account of the history. So they have elaborate stories about how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was being tested with the questions about who were the companions of the cave, who was Dhul Qarnayn, and tell us about the ruh, the spirit. And they feel that these are the questions that are answered in this surah and elsewhere in the Quran in response to the questioning of the others. To them, the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, hung on the balance here. Would he be able to answer these questions of the interlocutors and prove himself to be a prophet, being privy to knowledge which was not available on the ground? It only had to come to him by a divine revelation. So with this in mind, they shied away from seeing the link between the Quranic narrative and the pre-existing stories about Dhul Qarnayn. Later on, other scholars picked this up, like Theodore Noldeck, for example, and more recently, Kevin Van Bladel, and even more recently than that, Sidney Griffith. These are scholars who have studied the Syriac tradition in particular and found that the Syriac version of the Alexander story has details which are very similar to what is mentioned in the Quran. Of course, the Quran transcends those details, and many of the mythical elements that are there in the pre-Quranic stories, especially in the Syriac version, are omitted from the Quran, and the Quran has a more reasonable description of a person that is called Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one. But what is more important in the Quran are the lessons that come out of the story of Dhul Qarnayn. Where does that leave us? So the classical Muslim commentators did suggest that this was Alexander the Great, but not with absolute uniformity. Some more recently, like Abul A'la Maududi, said that, okay, it couldn't be Alexander the Great because Alexander the Great, who is known from history, was not a pious individual. And this is the story of a pious individual. So this, who could be a pious individual who matches some of the descriptions in the Quranic story? And so he settled for Cyrus the Persian. Cyrus the Persian in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, is even referred to as God's Messiah, because he rescued the Jews and got them, the people of God at the time, to be rescued from their Babylonian captivity and for them to resettle in the Holy Land. So he settled for Cyrus, and that shows the diversity that is there among the classical commentators and even among some modern ones, all with the attempt to avoid the pre-Quranic narratives that were there in story form in various languages, especially the Syriac language.
Does it matter who it is, Dr. Shabir?
No, from the Quranic point of view, it doesn't matter who it is, because what matters is the lessons that come out from it. And this is something that we need to be aware of with the Quranic narrative. When the Quran is saying, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, and they're asking you about Dhul Qarnayn. So that means, what are they asking about? What do people want to know at that time? We have to realize that this was the age before television. So today we go with reading materials. We have literature. We separate between fact and fiction. And in those days, people just wanted to hear a good story. Like, tell us a good story. Like, if you come and as a prophet of God, see, the classical commentators are saying that the question put to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was such that he had to relate to them factually that information about Dhul Qarnayn, which would not have been known to him except by a revelation from God. But my variation on that is to say that the people wanted to hear from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a version of the story. Like, they're saying to him, you tell us about Dhul Qarnayn, but tell us in a way that will impress us. So that's what they want to hear. They want to hear a version of the story of Dhul Qarnayn that will bring out good moral lessons.
The Muslim version.
A Muslim version. Like, they are preempting a Muslim version here. They're saying to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, look, there are all these stories about Dhul Qarnayn, and especially in the Syriac legend of Dhul Qarnayn turns out to be a Christian type of individual, and what he does supports the Christian message. In fact, this is how Jacob of Sirog, about 100 years before the Quranic revelation, had styled the story. So the story supports a Christian outcome. So you tell us, like, how would Dhul Qarnayn fit within your vision of the world? Like, what is Dhul Qarnayn now? You tell us. It's like, you're watching a movie and the movie says that this is based on a true story. So what you're concerned with in the movie is not that every element in that narrative should be true, but you know that there is a true story. So there is a true individual, yes, but tell us about this individual in such a way that will motivate us towards good things, that will draw us and the society. You claim to be a reformer. Well, reform us by means of this story. And so the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was being challenged not to relate the facts of history about Dhul Qarnayn, but to tell the story in such a meaningful way that it brings out the higher moral teachings and ethical and theological teachings that the Quran is trying to impress upon its hearers.
All right. Thank you for that, Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.